Imagine a vault. This isn't just a standard bank safe, it is a vault the size of a continent. Inside, it is overflowing with gold, platinum, diamonds, and the rare earth minerals that make every smartphone, laptop, and electric vehicle on Earth function. The doors to this vault are locked from the inside, and the keys are held by a select few. But if you look closely at the architecture of this room, you'll notice something strange. The floor is built on a slight, almost imperceptible tilt. Without a single window being broken, without an alarm sounding or a safe being blown, the wealth is simply sliding out. It is dripping into the pockets of people living 10,000 miles away, while the people standing inside the vault are left to wonder why they are hungry. For decades, the world has been fed a very specific, very comfortable fairy tale. We are told that Africa is poor because of a lack of development, because of tribal warfare, or because of a lack of modern education. We are shown glossy images of humanitarian aid, creating a narrative that the West is a generous benefactor pouring money into a leaky bucket. But if you follow the actual data of global money flows, a shocking contradiction emerges. Africa is not a poor continent. It is a plundered continent. And this plunder is not a failure of the system. It is the system itself. Let's look at the first realization. Africa is a net creditor to the rest of the world. Every single year, significantly more wealth leaves the African continent than enters it through aid, loans, and investment combined. We have been trained to think of Africa as a charity case, but the reality is that the rest of the world is living off Africa's credit. This isn't a story of a struggling region. It is a crime scene investigation into a global machine designed for extraction. The bucket isn't leaky, it's being siphoned by a sophisticated parasite. The engine of this poverty is something called the value-added trap. This is a rigged game where the rules are written by those who already own the board. Think of a cocoa farmer in Côte d'Ivoire. He spends his entire life in the sun harvesting beans. He sells a bag of those beans for a few dollars. That bag is shipped to Europe, where a factory turns it into chocolate bars. Those bars are then sold back to the world, and often back to Africa, at a markup of over 1,000%. The global trade system allows Africa to be the world's garden, but it strictly forbids it from being the world's kitchen. When an African nation tries to build its own factories to process its own oil, minerals, or crops, it hits a wall of tariffs. Raw materials are allowed to leave Africa tax-free, but as soon as those materials are turned into a finished product, Western markets slap them with massive import duties. It is an economic prison. The system forces these nations to sell the ingredients at a discount and buy back the cake at a premium. It is a machine that ensures you can never save enough to build your own bakery. This is not about a lack of industry, it is about a global policy that actively deconstructs it. But where does the money go that actually manages to stay on the continent? This brings us to this siphon, illicit financial flows. This isn't just about corrupt politicians hiding cash in Swiss banks, though that is a piece of the puzzle. The vast majority of this theft is corporate and legal. It is done through a mechanism called trade misinvoicing or transfer pricing. Imagine a massive multinational mining company extracting copper in Zambia. Instead of selling that copper directly to the market, they sell it to their own subsidiary company based in a tax haven like the British Virgin Islands or Switzerland. They sell it to themselves for a fake, ridiculously low price. On paper, the Zambian mine shows no profit, and therefore pays zero taxes to the Zambian people. Meanwhile, the subsidiary in the tax haven sells that same copper to the real buyer for the full market price, pocketing billions in tax-free profit. This is a surgical extraction. The wealth is removed before it can even touch the local economy, leaving behind nothing but hollowed-out earth and toxic water. Then, there is the ghost of colonialism that still haunts the pockets of millions. In 14 African nations, the currency used is the CFA franc. For decades, these countries were legally required to deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves directly into the French treasury. Imagine working a full month, but your paycheck is deposited into your former landlord's bank account, and you have to ask his permission to spend your own money. This is not just stability, it is a financial straitjacket. These nations cannot control their own interest rates or devalue their currency to make their exports competitive. It is a system of monetary servitude that ensures the former colonial power keeps its hand on the throat of the economy, long after the flags have been lowered. When the resources have been siphoned and the currency is locked, the global system offers a solution: debt. But even here the game is rigged. Because of perceived risk, African nations are forced to borrow money at interest rates that are often 3 or 4 times higher than what European nations pay. While a wealthy country might borrow at 1%, A nation in sub-Saharan Africa is charged 10% or 12%. This is a poverty tax. These countries end up spending more on interest payments to Western banks than they do on their own healthcare systems or schools. It is a debt trap designed to be permanent. You aren't paying off the loan, you are simply paying for the right to remain in debt. It is a modern form of indentured servitude on a national scale. Look at the very infrastructure of the continent. If you look at a map of African railways and roads, you will see a pattern. They don't connect the great cities of the interior. They don't facilitate trade between neighbors. Instead, they are almost exclusively straight lines leading from a mine or an oil field directly to a seaport. This is not a circulatory system for a healthy body, it is a series of exhaust pipes. This infrastructure wasn't built to develop a continent, it was built to facilitate its exit. The very ground under the feet of the people has been turned into a conveyor belt moving toward the ocean. Then we must talk about the resource curse, which is actually a resource parasite. In a normal world, having oil or cobalt would make you rich. But in a rigged system, it makes you a target. Large corporations and foreign powers often find it cheaper to fund a local conflict or support a puppet regime than to pay a fair price for minerals. Stability leads to regulation and higher taxes. Instability leads to cheap, unregulated extraction. In this dark logic, a war in a mineral-rich region isn't a tragedy for the global market, it's a discount. The chaos is the lubricant that makes the extraction easier. This leads to the most tragic extraction of all, the brain drain. When the brightest minds, the doctors, the engineers, the scientists, see that the system in their home country has been designed as a resource colony, they leave. Africa spends its precious, limited budget on basic education and medical training, only to have the global north harvest that talent for free. Every year, thousands of highly skilled Africans move to Europe and North America to fill labor shortages. It is the final theft, the theft of the intellect and the hope that could have redesigned the system. The continent is essentially subsidizing the healthcare and tech sectors of the West with its most valuable human capital. And let's not forget energy poverty. Africa has the world's greatest potential for solar and wind energy, and massive reserves of natural gas. Yet, over 600 million people live in total darkness. Why? Because the energy infrastructure is also extractive. The gas is liquefied and shipped to heat homes in Europe. The electricity generated by massive dams is often bypassed directly to foreign-owned industrial complexes, skipping over the villages that sit in their shadow. It is like living next to a massive banquet but being forbidden from even smelling the food. The continent provides the light for the rest of the world while sitting in the dark itself. We have to ask ourselves, why does the story of corruption dominate the news while the story of extraction remains hidden? Because if we blame corruption, we can pretend the problem is local. We can say, if they just fixed their governments, everything would be fine. But if we acknowledge extraction, we have to admit that the global economy, our electronics, our low-cost goods, our banking stability, is built on a foundation of African poverty. The corruption is often just the grease on the gears of the extraction machine, paid for by the very companies that claim to value transparency. The global system is not broken. It is working perfectly. It is a machine designed to move wealth from the many to the few, from the south to the north, from the producer to the middleman. Africa is the engine room of the world, but the people in the engine room are never allowed onto the deck. They are the fuel for a ship they are not permitted to steer. So we end with a question that the textbooks usually avoid. If the global economy requires a constant flow of cheap raw materials and high-interest debt to maintain the lifestyle of the West, does the world actually want Africa to be wealthy? Or is Africa's poverty the very fuel that keeps the rest of the world's engine running? If the vault door ever truly locks, if the floor is leveled and the wealth stays where it was found, what happens to the rest of the world that has been living off the tilt? Are we ready for a world where Africa isn't the victim but the owner? Or is the system too dependent on the crime to ever allow the investigation to reach its conclusion? If you like this video, click the subscribe button. Write about which country you would like to see the video. Thank you for watching.